Welcome to Boating Insights. This is a podcast about achieving your boating dreams, brought to you by Above and Beyond Boating. We deliver the leading courses to skipper your own boat. Hi, I'm Neil Driscoll of Above and Beyond Boating. Thank you for coming back to our Boating Insights. Today I'm going to be talking to you about weather, and in particular putting the why in your weather predictions. Now, weather is something which affects all of us, obviously, whether we're on boats or land. I'm clearly, as a Boating Insights podcast, and I'm going to be talking to you about the issues in and around the water. The idea here is to just try and give you some ideas to help kind of take your weather game up a notch. Something I find is that most people now have become very proficient at looking at the weather forecast and being able to tell me what's in it, or even using things like the Predict Wind or some of the other services have got some incredibly easy to use route planning options now, where you can get into quite a lot of detail. I don't want wind over this and wind under this and waves over this and so on, and tell me what day to leave on. Now that's all well and good. The thing that I want to kind of come back to today is just some of the raw basics. Now, not necessarily all the way back to just plotting a barometric reading on a graph and looking out the window, but what I'm aiming for you to be able to do is that if you are reading, watching, absorbing a weather forecast or prediction, that you put some why into it. Now, an obvious place to start is to just, if you see it says something, it's going to be windy, wet, dry, foggy, just ask yourself, why is this? Now, the reason I say that is, as everything's kind of become a bit more snazzy with all the funky arrows and your weather predictions now, rather than someone reading out this kind of old school shipping forecast, is these beautiful, pretty coloured graphs with arrows that tell you when it's certain wind strengths and directions and all this kind of stuff, and you press play and watch it all happen, or your windy TV. If you didn't have that fundamental understanding of what's going on to begin with, then there's a very real chance that you might well have not got an opportunity to work out why sometimes you end up with conflicting weather forecasts. And I'm going to come back to that, because that's kind of the key part of all of this, is that often when there's a decision to be made, it's hard to call. It's 50-50 on why the weather might be one or two things, and we'll look at that more in a minute. But if you ask yourself why does it say there's no wind tomorrow? Why is it going to be really windy on Saturday? You might just go, well, I've got no idea, mate. and that might prompt you to take some steps to learn more. Obviously, that's something we do. Our Day Skipper Course is an area for that particularly. And if you've already kind of got that stuff nailed, then the online skipper has great implementation techniques for you for the passage planning and implementation. But what's great is that when you start looking at the why, what happens is you'll start to look at the synoptic charts, so the charts that show you all the pressure lines on the area that you're looking at, and the isobars, and hopefully you're getting to a point that you can understand what's going on there. And the reason I say this is because that's how you'll start to get a bit of a why. And you'll go, okay, right, I understand. There's a high pressure system. It's moving over here. There's a low that's stuck in this area, and that's causing this to happen. And that's where the why comes from. And the reason the why is so important is often, it depends where you are in the world, but it's a reasonably good rule of thumb that most weather forecasts can't be relied upon for more than about 3 days out. They're just an educated guess all the time, but obviously the closer you get, the more educated they are. So, for example, on a Monday, when someone tells me it's going to rain on Sunday, I always smile politely, and they might be right, but there's the basis behind being able to be that accurate that far out is pretty difficult most of the time. So we come back to the why. So when you're looking at if you look at weather forecast, if this is all new to you, an easy thing to do is just find a couple of tabs wherever you are in the world. So you get the weather forecast, and then also just for your local meteorological service, just have a look at the barometric pressure that day. If you're stuck inland, you're listening to this and you're in the middle of the desert or something at the moment, then just pick a place that you like to go sailing and just use that as your venue. For a number of years, I used to every morning just do this for where I was from in England, and then where I live in Sydney, just to kind of keep me tuned into the two different hemispheres. And you also, given the proximities to the poles and the equator, they're subject to quite different weather patterns as well. Fortunately, I live in the one with the better ones. But when you're having a look at the synoptic situation, you start to see patterns emerge and go, oh, okay, this always seems to, whenever there's a high pressure stuck here, then we often seem to end up with, rain 3 days later or whatever it might be. One of the reasons I encourage you to start understanding these patterns is, regardless of your view on what's caused the global climate to change, that there couldn't really be any arguing with the fact that it has. And what that means is that a lot of historical data is in fact, which is what we use for kind of basing our passage planning or this is when you should cross oceans, etc., is in fact based on a world that we no longer live in. And the reason I raise that for you is, for example, 10 years ago when I lived in England, if I told you that you were going to do the arc crossing and it would be upwind, you'd laugh at me. It was always pretty easy. You just kind of went, you go south until the butter melts and turn right. But what you've seen in just the last 10 years, you've had people going upwind, you've had no wind, you've had changes. It's completely different from this guaranteed trade wind situation. Like, I've just picked one scenario in one place in the world. Some of you could easily find them for me where they've been consistent forever, and others would find some that are more extreme. The point is that it's important that rather than just being able to open a pilotage guide and be told, right, you always leave in May, or plug in your data to predict wind and blindly follow the answer out into the deep blue sea. I just want you to feel confident in the data that when you're saying I'm going to depart from Antigua in May, or I'm going to sail to Auckland in January, that you've got more basis behind it than just that a computer program told you to and a guy you met in the yacht club bar says that's what he always does. Now, how this then progresses is understanding for where you are the balance between what we call the observations, which is just as it sounds, it's find them, local weather service, and see what's actually happening on the day. Now, where this becomes interesting is often if you take a weather service, you might be able to display 3 or 4 different weather models. And they are just that, they're just models based on a whole bunch of historical data and outcomes that they expect. So when you're looking at that, it's the times that they disagree, that's when you become interesting. Because you might look at 4 models and there'll be 2 of them say one thing, 2 of them say something else. And as you get closer to when that weather event is due to happen, it's then watching the observations and seeing which one got it right. So rather than always saying, oh, this one is the most accurate weather model, what you'll often find is that if the wind's blowing from the south, this is more accurate, but when it's blowing from the northeast, then the other one, it's more accurate. And this can make a massive difference. You might think, especially if you're kind of doing cruises, just maybe 50, 100 mile cruises, that you don't need this level of detail, but it does give you a lot of confidence. I reckon it's got to be more than 10 years now since I found myself in weather that I wasn't expecting, because the weather forecasting has got so good, but also it is really still only as good as the person looking at it. And what's handy is that when you understand on the marginal forecast what's going on, it allows you often to make a trip or get out on a day that, you know, lots of weather sites might tell you it's not going to work, and actually it's perfectly fine. And one of the things I do as a rule of thumb is I say 3 times the length of the trip. So if I'm planning to do a sail that's going to last for a week, then I want to be looking carefully 3 weeks out. If I'm looking at doing a sail that's going to be a day, then, you know, paying attention in the running, but particularly 3 days out, that's when I'll be paying a lot of attention. Now, if this is all new to you and you're interested, then definitely the either the day skipper or, you know, the complete skipper would be the way to go. You can take yourself forward with some, you know, simple ideas that I'm suggesting here, just by studying your own weather forecast and predictions, the synoptic charts and the corresponding observations. You'll be surprised how far that'll take you. And if you haven't had a play with services like Predict Wind yet and playing with the route functions on that, then, you know, I'd highly recommend giving that a go, because it's really quite awesome. I've only mentioned Predict Wind. There are many others. I just used one that was, you know, relatively low cost and accessible all over the world. So look, thanks very much, everybody, and I hope this was helpful. Bye.